focus on what matters.
I'm Erica Pandy, business reporter at Axios, coming to you from Hoboken, New Jersey, and welcome to our new Era of Learning virtual event. I want to welcome our audiences on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, and on Axios.com, and thanks to the Charles Koch Foundation for making this conversation possible. Join the conversation today on Twitter with @Axios and the hashtag #AxiosEvents. Over the next 30 minutes, we'll unpack the future of education, innovation in the field, and career readiness after COVID-19. Our first guest is CEO and co-founder of Guild Education, Rachel Carlson, who's joining me from Denver, Colorado today. Hey, Rachel.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So, Rachel, there's this conception in the US still that education is about college, is about degrees, is about high school, and students are usually younger people. Guild sees it a little bit differently. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so if the old model of education was what we call the 4 and 40, right? You're going to go to college for 4 years, probably at age 18. You're going to graduate, and then you're going to go work at one company for 40 years and retire into the sunset. We think the 4 and 40 is about dead at this point. And at Guild, we believe in the post-secondary education landscape called the every 4, which is that the labor data tells us today that the half-life of a skill in America is about 4.5 years. And what that means is that all of our workforce, but particularly our frontline workforce, are going to need to be reskilling on an every 4-year basis throughout their careers. That also aligns with what we're hearing from workers, which is that they don't intend to work at one company for 40 years, and they're trying to figure out how to rewrite their social contract with that company.
Now, automation was already chipping away at a lot of jobs, especially the frontline jobs that you talk about. And then the pandemic came along, accelerated a lot of those automation trends, and then closed down a ton of businesses as well. The latest report from McKinsey says that 17 million or more Americans are going to have to reskill or find new jobs in the next 10 or so years. Do we have enough programs out there? Do we have enough resources out there for this vast population of folks?
Yeah, we do. The issue is matching. It's less the supply demand. It's figuring out how to match folks with those roles. So I think, and we think at Guild, that most of the jobs of the future start with digital or end with manager. So what you're doing then is you're looking at populations like the 3 million cashiers in America, and you're helping them figure out what's next. When you ask them what they're great at, they think about it in today's competencies in terms of things like customer service. Well, it turns out customer service by another name is bedside manner in allied healthcare, but the skill they're lacking is the technical skill of, whether that's phlebotomy or allied healthcare or becoming an LPN or a vocational nurse. And so the work to be done to bridge today's economy to tomorrow's economy is building those skills competency mappings and helping learners understand, what do I need to learn to move from today's job to tomorrow? That sounds easy when described that way. The problem is this is also the first time in really world history that we've asked people to do that. All other generational changes where the labor economy moved from, say, an agricultural economy to an industrial, or an industrial to a knowledge, meant that the father's job went away and his son was required to reskill into a new industry. In today's world, the worker's most likely a woman, she's most likely a mother, and she's having to reskill within her own career. So it is a really sizable issue. And beyond that skills issue, we really have to talk about the wraparound and the support and the community that we're putting around her so that she can reskill within her own career. And that's what Guild really focuses on.
Are employers there yet? I mean, because now I'm thinking about myself. If I'm to apply to a job as a journalist, my resume will say, I've worked here, I've worked here. It won't say things like, I'm a good communicator, I'm a good writer. We're still focused on roles and credentials rather than skills. How do we do that sea change as applicants and as companies?
Yeah, so on one level, no, but interestingly enough, and this aligns with what Clayton Christensen would tell you about disruption, the most interesting behaviors, the change to what you're describing as skills-based hiring is happening in the corners of the economy that are in crisis. So areas like hiring for a variety of frontline roles, hiring into healthcare, hiring into financial services, where they're all in deep crisis amidst this war for talent, that's where you find the chief people people officers who we find to be most innovative, who are saying enough with hiring on resumes. Resumes are practically useless when you need to be hiring someone for skills. Let's figure out how to actually identify those skills, validate those skills, and hire in for them. And that means more dynamic ways of hiring, but also more dynamic ways of reskilling an existing workforce to get prepared for those future jobs.
So we've established this huge demand and need for reskilling, but who pays for it? Is it the government? Is it companies reskilling their own workers? Is it organizations like Guild coming in and consulting with companies? Is it kind of all of the above?
I think all of the above is the right answer. At Guild, we're fairly agnostic as to who pays in today's world because there are a variety of payers. I think the answer is everybody needs to be funding more. I think the federal government and our state governments need to make workforce development and skilling a top priority, not only of their citizenry, but also of national competitiveness. There are countries that are doing a far better job at this than the United States, and we're going to have a real problem if we don't get our act together. I think additionally, the future of many corporate enterprises is going to rely on them becoming a learning culture and a lifelong learning culture. And when people ask us all the time, what are the skills of the future? The one I always highlight is the only future-proof skill is learning. And so if you're not embedding learning as a core competency within your workforce, you're not going to be a successful company of the future.
What are some examples out there, either that Guild has worked on or you've seen elsewhere, of really great innovative things companies are doing to support their workforce?
Yeah, I have the great pleasure of getting to watch that all over the US right now, which is so fun. I think there's tremendously cool innovation happening in childcare. We at Guild had the privilege of building our own on-site childcare and daycare, as well as a preschool that serves 78 kids here in Denver. But for companies that are distributed, there are now a whole ecosystem of startups that are helping companies think about distributed childcare, in-home solutions, networks of childcare arrangements. I think that's really exciting. I'm thrilled by the innovation that is happening in and around financial wellness. We partner at Guild, as do many of our partners, with a tool called Origin that really helps employees understand financial wellness, as well as for organizations like ours that give equity ownership to every employee. How do they think about that? How do they plan for all of the financial elements of that? So that area is really exciting around financial wellness. But back to the bigger picture, if we're going to have an economy that requires people to be reskilling and upskilling as they move through their career rather than once when they go to college, we have to build an ecosystem of support where your employer is also helping you think about how do you manage your family responsibilities? How do you manage your financial? In addition to what has classically been, how do you take care of your physical health? And mental health is increasingly becoming a part of that equation. So I'm really optimistic about the solutions that are burgeoning in and around the employee experience right now.
And I mean, there's a war for talent going on right now. Companies need to hire. Workers are going to look for companies that have these reskilling opportunities, these educational opportunities as a perk to join a job. You're working with one of the biggest employers in the US, Target, right?
Yeah, we're thrilled that this summer we had the chance to announce Target's program. They're investing $200 million in the reskilling of their workforce, as well as increased educational opportunities. And those opportunities are incredibly comprehensive. They include how to grow in characteristics like digital skills or people and project management and move up within Target's business. But they also include a wide portfolio of programs for employees who want to join Target and be there for 3 to 5 years and then move on and become a nurse or a teacher. So we're really excited that companies like Target, as well as organizations like Walmart and Disney and JP Morgan, Discover Financial, are all really saying, how do we support our workforce as they think about their career opportunity?
And so, I mean, do you think this is going to be increasingly a way people recruit workers or lose them? Which companies are coming forward with these programs and which are not?
Absolutely. We are watching that the companies winning the war for talent right now are those who are investing in their employees' education. When you look at Gen Z and millennials as a workforce, the top thing they're asking for from their employer, besides basic dignity in the pay, in the time they get off, in terms of, basic services that come with a company expectation, the next thing they're asking for is career development, learning, and education. And so the companies that are delivering on that to their workforce are the ones who are seeing attraction rates that are, 25, 30% higher than their peer companies as they go out to hire workers today.
So the 4 and 40 model is dead, and companies really need to get with the program. Thanks so much, Rachel, for this illuminating conversation and for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. This is awesome.
And now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Dominique Taylor, Chief People Officer at Axios, for a view from the top segment. Over to you, Dominique.
Thank you, Erica. Now joining us from Wellsville, Utah is Ryan Stowers, Executive Director of the Charles Koch Foundation, the sponsor of this event. Welcome, Ryan.
Thank you, Dominique. It's great to be here.
Ryan, the Charles Koch Foundation partners with social entrepreneurs to remove the barriers that prevent people from reaching their potential. In what ways has your education-focused work encountered and solved for the many changes in how we work and learn in the context of COVID-19 and the shift to a remote reality?
We're trying to work to help solve it. We haven't figured it out. And our approach in all that we do is one that's based on humility and a strong push for experimentation and learning. In some cases, and we've definitely seen this during the pandemic, in a lot of cases, you, me, all of us, we're the biggest barrier. In fact, the way we think about the role that education plays in society. And as you know, education is very top down. It's one size fits all. And you can see this in how we focus and prioritize to solve problems in education, especially during COVID. So when we prioritize seat time, credit hours, when we treat all students like the average student, we lose sight of what matters the most. And that's the passions, the interests, the unique characteristics of the individual learner. So get this, 61% of Americans believe that colleges need to change and better meet the needs of students. And only 16% think that students needed to do a better job of adjusting to the tried and tested model of a traditional four-year college degree. So something's shifting in how we think about the future of learning. The question is, can we all help to make this shift more comprehensive, make it happen more quickly, and ultimately more effectively? And so how does post-secondary ed need to change? Imagine if every learner was empowered to do three things. First, discover their aptitudes, where they have interest, where they have passion, where they have strengths. Second, develop the knowledge and skills based on those aptitudes that will help them be successful. And third, apply what they've learned to improve their lives and the lives of others. Imagine the impact on society if more people, more learners, if every person was able to realize their potential by going through that kind of a learning experience. That's what gets us excited. And that got us excited before COVID, and it gets us excited into the future.
Very relevant now, how to identify and unleash people's potential. But access and costs still remain real barriers to the kind of education many are promised in whatever form. So how are innovators taking on these existing models and working to make them match these demands of Americans seeking out a continued education?
Yeah, and some incredible work is being done by ed entrepreneurs. You're hearing from two of them today, and the work that Rachel's leading at the Guild Group and Kathleen at Education Design Lab. It's really important to note there is no silver bullet, and we've got to resist this idea that there's one type of pathway to learning and to a successful career. In fact, some of the most exciting opportunities we're seeing are with accessible and affordable skills-based programs that lead directly to in-demand jobs. And one of the entrepreneurs and groups we're so excited about is Steve Lee and the Skill Up Coalition. I don't know if you've heard of them, but when millions of workers were displaced during the pandemic, Skill Up, they stepped up. And their goal is to empower workers to quickly connect with affordable upskilling programs that lead to in-demand jobs. And in 1 year, they've empowered nearly 500,000 workers and learners to take that next step toward a better pathway. They've launched the Skill Up Together Fund, which directly supports hundreds of workers. They're literally breaking down the financial barrier to developing new skills. And they've opened access to 400 plus different training programs. We think that's incredible, but Skill Up's not alone. So Skill Up and many other organizations have made significant progress in response to COVID. But the truly exciting aspect of all these projects, they're driving innovation in a way that will transform learning forever.
Yeah, the ripple effects are very important there. And in that vein of the work that they're doing, how is the Koch Foundation focusing on career readiness as an outcome of the adapted approach of education?
Yeah, so having a sense of purpose in work is consistently ranked as the priority for employees. But only a third of students at four-year institutions believe they're going to graduate with skills and knowledge to be successful in the workplace. So learners want and need more alternatives. And one example is Mike Rowe and the Micro Works Foundation. Earlier this year, Mike and his foundation, they announced scholarships for nearly 140 aspiring workers, supporting 17 skilled trades in 38 states. And more than that, maybe more importantly, Mike is removing a stigma by showing millions of people how dynamic, fulfilling, and profitable work can be found in the skills trades. So these pathways, people jumping in and their stories, these have got to be celebrated. And we're eager to elevate and amplify many, many more dynamic pathways.
That's fantastic. And to close us out, as American education applies the lessons learned in this first pass at a remote first world, how can they develop a more tailored individual approach of learning? And what are the potential outcomes of a more tailored approach?
The potential outcomes from something like this is absolutely huge. And it's worth emphasizing how quickly things are changing. Earlier this year, we did a poll. We found that of those who anticipate the need to acquire new skills, 72% expressed a preference for an option other than a traditional four-year college or university. So a more tailored, individualized approach is one that empowers and puts the learner first. And it's exactly what's being left on the table now. And we can't afford to ignore that moving forward. So we're energized by partnering with leaders in this space, those who are experimenting and designing new dynamic pathways. If we can change the landscape of options, millions of learners and workers can pursue careers that create fulfillment and purpose. And as I said at the beginning, Dominique, we don't have all the answers. We're hoping and we're betting that social change entrepreneurs out there, hopefully many of who are listening right now, do have the answers. And so we invite you to join us at ckf.org to learn more, and we'd love to partner with you.
That's fantastic. A really fascinating conversation, and I appreciate the insights you highlighted in the work that you are doing. Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you, Dominique. It's great to be with you.
And thank you again to the Charles Koch Foundation for sponsoring. And now back to my colleague, Erica Pandy.
Thanks, Dominique. So our final guest is founder and CEO of the Education Design Lab, Kathleen Delasky, who's joining me now from Washington, D.C. Hi, Kathleen.
Hi, Erica. How are you today?
Good, and how are you?
I'm well, thank you.
So I want to start by asking you about a term you use, the new majority learner. What does that mean?
So the new majority learner is basically anyone for whom college was not originally designed. And when I say originally, we're going back, 500 years, and even in this country, not quite that long, but to the time when landowners would send their sons off the estate to an institution, the ivory tower, to learn from the dons, the university dons, and get a well-rounded liberal arts education. That model has not changed in the entire time it's been prevalent in the US. The only difference is we've started to let more people in, right? In 1900, about 18 or 19% of those in college were women. In the 40s and 50s, after the GI Bill, we started to let in more people of color started to come in when they came back from the war. And Hispanics have come in now to a larger degree, but the groups that are now part of the college access and completion movement, college was never designed for them. So part of what we have really tried to build support for is this notion that you need to listen to the needs of these learners that are currently have different life situations than those original sons of landowners, and we need to create different models of college for them. And by the way, I should say this is not just a demographic distinction, right, in terms of race or gender. It's also returning veterans, single moms, undocumented workers. There are several other groups that we incorporate into the definition of new majority learner.
Right. I was going to ask you that next. It's not just 18 to 22-year-olds who are getting a college or post-secondary education, right?
That's right. In fact, that group is fast declining in terms of their numbers. If you're in college admissions circles, you talk very with much hand-wringing about the enrollment cliff of the traditional age college student, 18 to 24. That group is going to drop off dramatically after 2025. And so colleges of all types are scurrying to try to develop new markets, in particularly with adult learners and working learners. And those people obviously need they have very different needs for getting either a degree or any kind of learning agenda.
So what are some of the main barriers for those people who fall out of that 18 to 24 range, fall out of that traditional college student range? And then what are some of the most innovative solutions out there that you're seeing either at Education Design Lab or elsewhere?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we come at that question from what we call learner voice, and we use a human-centered design process to sort of either watch what happens to the new majority learner as they try to go through this system, or we sit down and interview them and ask them to prototype with us, to actually design solutions or parts of solutions. And I would say we've boiled down into 5 categories, the things that are most important to new majority learners. The first one, is pretty obvious, which is affordability, right? So the cost of college has to be as near zero as possible for many types of learners to be able to access it. And the second one is really flexibility. And certainly COVID demonstrated that, all learners need flexibility when it came to, online learning, being able to take courses at night, being able to stop and start, this sort of thing. And then the third and fourth one are less obvious, but, make a lot of sense. Portability. A lot of people, go take a class somewhere, or maybe they did a boot camp, and then they want to go to college, or they have lots of work experience. But how do they then go on from there and transfer or get credit, so they don't have to start over every time they re-enroll or try to go back to school? So that's portability. Relevance is one that's increasingly become important because of the mismatch between what's being taught in some colleges and the sort of the emerging future of work types of jobs that employers are trying to hire for. So relevance is the fourth one. And the fifth one is really important, but is sort of just coming into view. We call it visibility. And that's this notion that everyone's going to get hired in the future, and it's starting to happen already, through these search engines where the employers are looking just for your skills and the name of the skills. And so they want to hire people based on skills rather than on a sort of vague degree, which they're more considering to be a blunt instrument. They want to hire based on skills. So we're trying to help learners be visible And so a lot of the programs are related to that. So those are the 5 sort of needs that we're hearing from new majority learners. And if I have time to just tell you one example of how we're putting that together in a new model for higher education. We've worked with learners and employers and colleges to create something called micro pathways, which are basically, it's less than a degree, but more than just like an individual industry certification, where you could come in and get a very quick and flexible credential that is visible to the employer. In fact, the employers have helped design them, and that those could lead to immediate employment that you could gain while you're taking classes, while you're continuing on with the degree. And then you can stop and start your education while you're working, which is also, one of the key demands of new majority learners.
You mentioned the pandemic. I want to ask you a little bit more about that. I mean, the pandemic has been this instrument of change in a lot of ways. One of the silver linings of this awful thing that the whole world has gone through is that a lot of industries have had time to sit back and think, maybe we don't have to do things the way we always did. You mentioned that happened in education. Are you seeing the education industry really start to make change that it hadn't in decades past?
Yes, absolutely. It's almost sort of like the COVID and the epidemic. It forced innovation to move at a much faster speed, because colleges and employers had to. And I would say the other thing that's really helped employers come to the table is actually the racial reckoning that folks went through last summer, after the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. Those conversations that emerged from those tragic events really caused corporate America to start to really have the conversation about how can we hire a more diverse pipeline? How do we find a more diverse pipeline? And how do we begin to do more to remove the barrier of the kind of degree that many new majority learners cannot acquire? And so you have several groups nationally around the country starting up initiatives to try to do what they would call more flexible hiring. One initiative is called multiple pathways initiatives. IBM has said, we're going to try to hire 50% of our people into professional roles that do not have a degree requirement. Those are the kinds of initiatives you're seeing from employers. And colleges are, like, we have 11 colleges now using this micro pathway model we mentioned. We have 11 more starting in January. They want to work with us to build these micro pathways that are specific to a role where there's a job need that employers are struggling to fill, and they're asking for short-term pathways to build a pipeline of talent and a pipeline of diverse talent to fill that void.
And just to give a little bit of context to our audience on why the programs Kathleen is mentioning are so important, around 75% of the new jobs that were added to the US economy between 2008 and 2017 required college degrees, but nearly 2/3 of the US labor force is comprised of workers without college degrees. So this
Right.
disconnect is really serious. And most of these jobs that require college degrees, you don't actually need one to do the job. It's the skill, right?
That's right. That's right. And so, yeah, a lot of companies are saying, particularly with this new talent shortage, they're saying, we're not going to get there if we require degrees. We have to remove them. And that's been another push in the last, 6 months or so, a reason why employers are coming to the table.
And I want to close with just one quick question for you, Kathleen. What's one thing that gives you hope for the next 10 years in education?
Wow. I think it actually is the level of innovation that came out of COVID. I mean, what it shows you is the people who are in these institutions. I mean, they know that they have to, move with the times and evolve, but they have been so good about, they're so focused on the students and meeting the student needs, and their ability to pivot on a dime and deliver what they did during COVID, to me, it was so heartening to watch and inspiring to be, a small part of.
Thanks for joining us today and for a wonderful conversation.
Thank you, Erica.
Thank you all for joining this afternoon for another virtual conversation that has made us all smarter, faster. Thank you to our sponsor, the Charles Koch Foundation, for making this event possible. For more info or to sign up for my Axios What's Next newsletter, visit axios.com/newsletters or visit the Axios app. We'll see you at our next event, and until then, follow all the breaking news on axios.com.